So let's start with the Golden State Warriors. Well, what in the world can they do from not just a disciplinary standpoint, but from a basketball standpoint with Draymond Green in San Francisco?
Well, it's interesting because I was, if you guys follow me on Twitter, uber critical of the Warriors for not suspending Draymond Green. I thought it sent a terrible message to the young players in the organization about Draymond kind of having his run of the place. It really sent a message that, hey, we're afraid of Draymond Green. We're afraid of what he's going to do if we do suspend him when he comes back, and we don't want to, lose him emotionally, which they never really would if everybody was aligned that way. Steph Curry had his back in this, and I think sometimes you got to push back on that too. So I was very critical of that decision. However, when we got to extension weekend, this past weekend, messages were sent financially, which sometimes can be a lot more meaningful than sending messages with a suspension. Listen, Draymond's going to opt into his $27.5 million next year, so he'll be there this year. He'll be there next year. I think that's it for him. They have, their payroll next year is going to be $483 million with all told, with all the luxury tax, with what they're paying Poole and what they're paying Wiggins. And I just don't think at that point that's going to be sustainable to do anything in terms of giving Draymond a raise. Listen, the other thing you got to realize, Wiseman's coming down the pike, and so are Kuminga and Moody. So I think that we can look at this year and next year with Draymond. I'm not buying that Draymond's going to be traded because, first of all, the Warriors are all about realizing value, and that's not realizing value with Draymond. He'll never be more valuable to them in a trade than he will be on the court for these next 2 years. But I do think that's kind of where we're getting to with Draymond Green, that his tenure here in the next 2 years with the Warriors is going to be winding down.
What do we know more about the Celtics post-Ime Udoka?
Well, I don't know that we know much about the Celtics post-Ime Udoka. I mean, obviously, Joe Mazzulla is going to have an interesting job ahead of him. I think that he's been put in an unfair position in having to deal with a team that, let's face it, is a legitimate title contender, and the guy's 34 years old and never been a head coach on an NBA level before. I think it's a very tough spot for him. I think it's a spot the Celtics would rather not be in. And you got to watch what happens on the defensive end of the floor. It's not just no Udoka. It's no Robert Williams to start the season for the first at least month to month and a half. And make no mistake, he is what made their defense elite. And they're a different team when Horford's got to be that big on the floor instead of Robert Williams being able to be with Horford or at times in place of Horford when they want to go play smaller lineups. So for the Celtics, there's a lot of defensive versatility that's lost with not having Williams on the floor. And listen, Udoka was a guy that was respected on that entire bench. He allowed those guys to air things out when he felt like it was necessary, but he was always somebody that kept it real. Is that going to be Joe Mazzulla? I have no idea. I will say this. I thought what was interesting is that when they had to promote somebody off that bench, I thought Damon Stoudemire got bypassed. I thought that he would have been a very good choice. The fact that he had been a player may have helped out last year with everything that went on there and may have maybe given him a little more cachet in that locker room. Because, listen, you need to have a coach with that team that Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown are going to respect. Both of those guys are very outspoken, at times at each other. It's a strange dynamic, guys, when your two most vocal leaders, neither of them are your alpha dog, even though one of them kind of feels like he is an alpha dog in Jaylen Brown. It's a weird dynamic there. It's a lot for Mazzulla to navigate, and I think it's going to be difficult for Joe Mazzulla this year. I think the Celtics will still be good to very good, but I don't know that they can get to the heights of where they got to last year.
Geltzy, what are you hearing out of Brooklyn and Ben Simmons?
I mean, Lawrence, everything I'm hearing is that it looks good. I mean, it's looked good. Everybody's happy there. Here's the thing about Ben Simmons in Brooklyn that everybody has to remember. He can be really good in Brooklyn and fit perfectly and not have to be different than the guy he was in Philadelphia. Ben Simmons is never going to be a three-point shooter. Let's forget it. Let's not talk about it. He's never going to be a three-point shooter. I'm not sure he's ever going to be a good free throw shooter. That's a little more disturbing because if he could hit free throws, it would enhance his game a ton. If you could be a 65 to 70% free throw shooter, I don't know that he ever is going to be that. But they need his defense. They were one of the worst rebounding teams in the league last year. They need his rebounding in the worst way. And his ability to push pace with the ball in his hands is very helpful. The other thing is this, if you watch Brooklyn, especially last year in the playoffs, so many possessions where Durant is the one initiating the offense. It's so tough on Kevin Durant to do that, especially now at the age of 34. And they like moving Irving off the ball sometimes because he's so good off the ball and so good to be able to make moves on a wing when he makes a catch with a step on somebody. So you want to be able to move Irving off the ball. Now you have this solution with Ben Simmons who can push the pace and tempo a little bit, handles the ball well, and on a passing cut, he clears space for your shooters and space for guys like Durant and Irving. Plus, you know what? Kevin Durant spent so much time in the last 2 years in Brooklyn having to defend the best perimeter player on the other team. He doesn't have to do that anymore. Ben Simmons can do that. As a matter of fact, he doesn't even have to have the second best perimeter player on the other team because they brought Royce O'Neal in to be able to do that. So I think Simmons' presence there is going to really work very well for Brooklyn. Listen, I don't know that everybody loves each other there, but I don't think you have to be a really good basketball team. Winning cures a lot of stuff. If they can stay healthy, guys want to stay on the floor and be a part of this. Kyrie in a contract year. Durant, who wants to prove something, so potentially, A, he wants to win. B, if they don't win, he wants to get out, so he's going to play as well as he can. I think Brooklyn, I look at Brooklyn as the team with the lowest floor and the highest ceiling of any team in the league, but I'm actually leaning towards that high ceiling than the low floor right now with what I've seen early on.
We know last year the Bulls took too many two-point shots and not enough threes. We also know they struggled to defend ball screens. We know that their drop defense also was at times exposed by not having rim protection. The Bulls came out of this offseason not really having addressed any of that and losing Lonzo Ball for an indefinite period of time. Why should we possibly think the Bulls are going to be any better than they were last year with all of the improbable games that they won?
You shouldn't, Dan. And I think you hit it all on the head. The Lonzo thing matters on a major level here. And just to realize, listen, when they originally signed Alex Caruso, it was to be a bench weapon. And they tried to stick with that last year. And Dan, you've heard me gush about him. I love Adebayo. I think he's a really productive young player in this league that can help the Bulls a lot. But they need Lonzo's defense. More than anything, they need Lonzo's defense. LaVine's not good enough to be a shutdown guy. DeRozan's kind of a sieve at this stage of his career. And there's no one really behind them. To me, the interesting dynamic is going to be, how does Billy Donovan manage Vuce and Andre Drummond? And there's going to be times we may not see Vucevic get the same minutes he got last year. We may see Drummond on the floor a little bit more because they need that defense. Now, listen, Andre Drummond is not the defender he once was either, but he's a significant upgrade on that end of the floor from Vuce. And I think that's going to be, how does Billy do this? What does he prioritize at certain points in time? Because if you have Caruso and Drummond on the floor together with those other guys, and you'll have Pat Williams back, you have three guys that, border on plus defenders. And so you group that with DeRozan and LaVine, you can kind of do that. Vucevic is the most interesting study here on what happens with the Bulls this year. In a contract year, I know they looked at potentially trading him in the offseason. They didn't really get offers that they felt as though were what he was worth. And I don't think he fits, and I think it's a problem. And really, it's ended up, when you look at what Orlando was able to gain in that trade, Wendell Carter, Franz Wagner was the pick, and now they got another top four protected coming out of that deal, and the Bulls got Vooch. That's a deal that has been an awful deal and really has hamstrung this rebuild for the Bulls and maybe put a little bit of a ceiling on it. I'm not trying to kill Nikola Vucevic, who I think is a nice NBA player. He's a poor fit here, and I think you're going to see this year now, how poor a fit he was. I think the Bulls take a major step back.
They're talking about positionless offense, where rather than doing what they did last year, which was a lot of Zach's turn, DeMar's turn, and trying to get Vucevic his touches, they're talking about more movement, more cutting. And is that a tacit admission that they did too much ball watching? Is that their way when Billy Donovan says, look, we're going to move the ball, we're going to have more back cutting, and it's going to be positionless? Is that just another way of saying don't stand around and wait for DeMar to do his DeMar stuff?
Well, I think what Billy's essentially saying is that at times we were easy to guard because we played too much isolation basketball with Zach and DeMar. I think that's kind of what that is, and they want to maybe spread the floor a little bit, do a little more 5-out, just have a little more action going on and try to get guys going to the basket off the dribble a little bit more. But I also think part of it is related to the fact that we need to get more out of our offense because our defense isn't going to be good. I think that matters too. And I think they want to be able to unleash guys that they feel like can shoot the ball decently. Patrick Williams is going to be an interesting guy to watch this year and what he does not only defensively but in the offensive end of the floor. So I think there's a combination of things there, but I think the bottom line is, heck, we got to figure out a way to score more because I look up and down this roster and I don't see a lot of guys that can stop anybody. I think that's what that statement's all about, man.
Geltzy, when I look at the Bulls and I'm trying to figure out what they are, I don't even have to look at the conference. I can look at the division. And obviously, Cleveland made improvements. I look at Detroit, and I think they had a really good offseason. Did they have a good enough offseason that they're going to be a team that can be contending for the play-in?
Probably not. I mean, listen, I still think the Bulls are better than the Pistons. I think the Pistons will make a move forward this year. Having Cunningham the whole year will certainly help. I'm a big Jaden Ivey fan. I think Sadiq Bey is a really nice player there. I think they'll – and listen, the Bogdanovich addition really helps them a lot. What are they going to win? 33, 34 games? And by the way, if they do, that's a successful season. To me, listen, I think the Bulls' downside is 37, 38 games. So I don't think they'll be better than the Bulls or the Knicks for that matter. Listen, I think the Knicks are in a similar. I think the Knicks and the Bulls are really right at the same level this year. So I guess, can Detroit be better? I think they can be better. Could they be better than Charlotte? Could they be better than Washington? I think they can. I think they can make a little bit of a move forward, and I think that would be progress for them. But let's not put the cart before the horse with this group. It's still a very young team, and I just don't know that they're ready to be a team that is competitive enough to be in a play-in tournament.
The Bulls will open their home season on Saturday night against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that's a team that decided they were going to go get better, and I'll be damned, they are noticeably better, and that's going to be a game to watch because this must be a fun time to be a Cavs fan.
Oh, there's no doubt. Listen, it's the big question there, and obviously, listen, the first question is a question that every team in the league has. How healthy are you going to stay? Because last year, look at the season the Cavs had. They lost in the play-in tournament. You look at the missed games. Rubio was on track for being sixth man of the year, and he blows a knee out. They lose Sexton really early in the year. They bring LeVert in. LeVert gets hurt. They do They did chunks of time here and there without Mobley. They had a chunk of time without Allen. They missed a lot of guys through the course of the season. So if they were healthy last year, they would have been a heck of a lot better. But now you go ahead and you add Donovan Mitchell in this mix. And that is that's much of that's an answer. That's also a question mark. Because let's face it, guys, Donovan Mitchell's act last year in Utah was not attractive. Donovan Mitchell didn't play hard all the time. He certainly didn't work hard on defense. He was a very selfish player, at times lazy offensively. Think about this. Donovan Mitchell is a brilliant off-the-dribble player. Try to explain to me why almost 50% of his shots were three-point shots. You want to blame some of that on Quinn Snyder, and they wanted him to shoot a lot of threes? Okay, he took an inordinate amount of threes off the bounce. Donovan Mitchell is going to have to play more energized basketball, better defensive basketball, and much better team basketball for this Cavs team to be as good as they are. Because I'm going to tell you something, Darius Garland is a stud at that point guard position. He's the best offensive player Mitchell's ever played with in his career. And Mitchell is going to have to, and it can't just be Darius Garland adapting to Mitchell. Mitchell's got to be willing to adapt to him. Donovan Mitchell, for all the talk about how mature he was when he first got to Utah, he got turned off on Rudy Gobert and turned off on that whole program, and he let it show through. Now he's here in Cleveland. It wasn't his first choice, by the way, although very happy to go there. It wasn't his first choice. Mitchell is now going to have to grow up a little bit on the fly and be a guy that, through some selflessness, leads a very young team that's got a ton of talent. Listen, I have Cleveland at a 6 seed this year. I have them just out of the play-in. And I think that's probably the right place for them because I do think that there's going to be some growing pains with this group. But listen, you bring in Rubio, LeVert, and Kevin Love off the bench. They're deep, they're solid, and there's a lot of upside to this club as well.
Is there a player in the league that maybe is not at MVP level that you think is ready to make a breakthrough this season and maybe get into that conversation?
In terms of what, like MVP?
Yeah, like is there someone outside of Joker and Giannis and Kevin Durant and LeBron?
Luka.
And Luke, you think Luka's ready?
No, Luka's there.
Oh, I think Luka's ready. I think Luka's ready. Another name I would keep a close eye on. Listen, he's been up there. He's been voted in the top 5 before, so he's not a new revelation. But I think Joel Embiid is a guy that is absolutely ready to be an MVP of this league. If he stays on the floor, he is that good. He can be that good. I think Harden being there is going to complement him a heck of a lot. Harden is in really good shape, guys, really good shape, and is ready to come out and prove something. I think that's an excellent team. So, I mean, I don't know that we're going to have somebody that comes out of nowhere for MVP. Generally, when you look at the history of the NBA, it doesn't really work that way because you get a guy that slides into the top 5 or a guy that kind of, throws the clock back and looks real good like DeRozan did last year. I mean, that's always a potential. There's always those kinds of guys out there. I mean, I don't know that anybody in the Clippers is going to play enough games to be that guy. Jamal Murray coming back from injury in Denver is a guy that's interesting to watch, but Denver's had the MVP the last 2 years in Jokic. So I don't see Murray necessarily ascending that. Listen, the one guy you can kind of look at a little bit if he has a really good year and his team is able to stay in the top 4 in the West all year, which I think is going to be hard with a major injury that they're coming into the season with, is John Morant. And that's the one guy that you have to look at and realize that if Memphis is going to be a top 4 seed again this year, they won 56 games last year, and my personal opinion is that really in a much tougher conference this year can only go south. They were able to take advantage of the fact that the Clippers in Denver had major injuries and kind of ascend in the way that they did. But I think Morant's the one guy you would have to look at. If Memphis has a lot of success, he catapults himself to the top of that conversation.
Geltzeiler, real quick before we let you go, one of the biggest names affecting the NBA this year is a guy who's not even here yet. And that's what's going on in the bottom quarter of the league regarding Victor Wembanyama. Even though, quote-unquote, tanking is only going to get you, a 14% chance of spinning that wheel and getting that opportunity, it does seem like this might be one of those generational type talents who could be worth increasing whatever chance you have. Are teams going to actually do that?
Yes, teams are going to race to the bottom. All you need to know about Victor Wembanyama is that the Spurs and the Jazz did it in the offseason. All right? They're going into the season with the express purpose of being absolutely terrible. And again, that's all about Victor Wembanyama. There's no doubt. But you may get other teams here that all of a sudden don't start out well. I mean, a big candidate is Charlotte. And Charlotte says, you know what? You want Hayward, you want Rozier. We'll start to sell off pieces and parts here to be able to do what we have to do to get in the mix for him. You'll see, Indiana's another team. You could see Hield and Turner go very quickly. The Thunder, all of a sudden, we could hear about a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander injury coming down the pike. And all of a sudden, if we can pair Wembanyama with Chet Holmgren, we want to see if we can do something like that. Like, you're going to see teams, if things go bad for certain teams, you're going to see teams just totally mail it in. Maybe the Blazers shut down Damian Lillard to put themselves in the mix. Like, this is going to be that year where March and April in the NBA, you're going to have a lot of really ugly games with a handful of teams, like 5 to 6 teams, putting players out there on the courts whose names you don't recognize. That's where this is going for Victor Wembanyama.
Brian Geltzeiler, just sounds like basketball,
yep.
And we needed that fix. Appreciate it as always.